Hi, thanks for tuning in today to Front Porch Conversations here at Advent Christian Village. And we are today on the front porch at the Copeland Community Center. I hope you enjoy the out of doors that we get to enjoy here and the beautiful morning. And I hope you'll tune in again. But now I'd like to introduce to you Brenda and Bob Story. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Ann.
And I'd like you to tell our viewers where you were each born and a little bit about your early childhood.
Who do you want to start?
Brenda, so you go first.
I was born in South Charleston, West Virginia in 1949 to Margaret and Nelson Hardway, and lived there until I was 17 when I went to Berkshire.
This may come as a little bit of a surprise to folks, but I was actually born out of the States. I was born in Digby, Nova Scotia. My parents were both American citizens. My mother from northern Maine, my dad from Vermont. And my dad was an Advent Christian pastor, and they were in Bear River, Nova Scotia Advent Christian Church when my time came. So I was born in Canada, didn't live there very long. I have no recollection of it at all.
You don't speak French?
No. But my mother early on would sit me down and make sure I understood that I was an American citizen, and I have the naturalization papers to show that. So yeah, I was born of, my dad was Garth Story and my mother Avis Fox Story, and they lived out their days here at Dowling Park.
And your father was still living when I came to work here, and I got to know
Yes.
him, and that was neat.
That would be correct, yeah.
What, you have siblings, or did you have siblings?
You go first.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm second of 6. I had an older sister, Margaret Diana. She passed away about 2 years ago, and I have a younger sister, Linda, and then I have a brother, Nelson, named after my dad, and then a set of twin boys, identical twin boys, James and Joseph. So, large family.
Yes.
There were 3 boys in our family. I think my mother was hoping for a daughter, which never happened. I was in the middle. My older brother, Garth Jr., and my younger brother, Timothy, who is also deceased. He was pastor in the Oxford, Maine church when he had a fast-moving cancer. He died in 1986.
And for each of you, what are your favorite memories of childhood?
Running on the hills of West Virginia like I was on a horse.
Without a horse?
Without a horse. But I could pretend that I had one.
And you had built-in playmates then with siblings?
Yeah, I guess you could say. The younger ones, the younger 3, were younger than me. And, you know, my sister and I were close in age. And they weren't tomboys like me.
Oh, okay.
I like to be outdoors and, like I said, play cowboys and Indians and ride horses. So, but anyway.
I have a lot of childhood memories, actually, too many to speak of them all. One that comes to my mind, I don't know the year, but it would have been late 50s. Dad bought us our first, what then was called a hi-fi, and it was about the same time that the Chipmunks song came out, and we had our 45s to play. That was a memory. At the time, we lived in New Hampshire, believe it or not, and while we were there, we, with my dad's supervision, actually built an igloo that you could go inside and stand up in. There are pictures of that somewhere along the line. But that's a couple of, I've always loved music. I always did a lot of listening to records and things. I've always had a love of music.
Well, in case there are people watching, tell them who the Chipmunks were.
Now,
Alvin,
Theodore.
Theodore, and I really can't remember.
I think
the
it's
other-
Simon. but-
Simon.
Simon.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, the Chipmunk song. You can Google it, I'm sure. Made the rounds. It was a big hit in the day.
It would not be described as classical music.
No.
Well,
No.
maybe classical in a different sense.
In a different sense. That's correct. That is correct.
Bob, tell me about the igloo. Was it built out of ice?
Well, apparently the snowfall, and they got a lot of snow in New Hampshire. This was on what was called Loudon Ridge, which was just a little bit away from the town of Loudon, where we rode school bus to go to school. I think the snow had to be especially of the right consistency. The best I can recall, it wasn't really ice, but it was squares of snow that somehow stayed together, and it was cold enough you could stack them. And somewhere, as I said, there was a picture to my dad did a lot of taking of slides, and we have some of those. We have some that have been converted into I guess a digital picture. It's around somewhere, but we even got my mother to crawl into the igloo, which was kind of a big deal at the time. So.
And it was probably an engineering feat to make it.
It would have had to have been, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did both of you live in the same place growing up until you, Bob, you moved around more?
I moved around quite a lot. Brenda, not so much.
But it was interesting. Probably in 52 or
Yeah.
53, my dad took the Biddeford, Maine church, Advent Christian Church in Biddeford, Maine. His dad and the family were in Bridgeton, Maine. And at the time my dad was ordained, his dad signed my dad's ordination papers because he was president of the conference, that ordained him. And we didn't know that. We'd been married a couple of years, and my mother took out of her cedar chest the copy
The
of
document.
the document. She wanted to show us that his dad signed my dad's ordination papers because we were both in Maine at the time. But we never met. I mean, we never knew each other, our whole lives. So.
And Bob, you also went to Berkshire?
Yes, yeah. Brenda and I met at Berkshire. She was 1 year behind me, but that is where we met. Among the Advent Christians, because it is a small denomination, we have these surprising, or maybe not so surprising, connections that occur. Soon after we moved here, I made a point to speak to our service coordinator, Darcy, whom we love, to his three boys, that I knew their great-grandparents. Back to Bridgeton, I was there as she has intimated, I was there as a child, but it also was our first church was back to Bridgeton.
And our son was born.
And our son was born there. Some of the women reminded me that they had changed my diapers, which was not such a happy thought. But Darcy's grandparents, that would be Janice Chapman's mom and dad, were active in that church, Lena and Malcolm Murch. And I still remember them. So it's just curious how these connections go along, but we did meet in fact at Berkshire Christian College.
And did both of you, were you going there because that was denominational school, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My dad had gone to NEST, as did his parents, and he wanted his kids to go there. My sister was signed up to go, and she was accepted and everything, but she was a year ahead of me. She decided she didn't want to go until I was ready to go. So the college actually got both of our applications at the same time, thinking that we must be twins coming to the school. Well, she got married in April before we were supposed to leave in June for school, and she didn't go. So when I got there, I didn't have a roommate because they were going to put us together. So so I went by myself, mostly to appease my dad, so that one of us could say that we went to his alma mater. So that's why.
Another interesting point, I want to have this documented. We are very good friends with Paul and Vicki Miner, and Dad took the church in Bristol, Connecticut, when I was probably 13 or 14, and the year would have been 61. That is where Paul and I first met up with each other in 7th grade. And we went through, finished grade school and went on to high school together. Paul was not in our church, but we were classmates in school. And after that, we were out of touch probably close to 45 years, I guess. And thankfully, our paths crossed again. And we are really glad that Paul and Vicki, they heard us talking about Dowling Park, and next thing you knew, they started showing up and loved the place. And of course, the rest, as they say, is history. They now are residents in Park of the Pines.
And neighbors.
Yes.
And neighbors.
And I guess I didn't mention to people that were watching, but you do live in Park of the Pines
Yes.
as well.
We do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
And I've had the conversation with them actually on their front porch.
Yes.
Yes,
this
that's
episode.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
And that was brought up then too. But I just think after a while, we need to go back through all these interviews and make this map of where everybody's life
Yes.
intersected,
Exactly.
because it has just been fascinating to me.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is. Being here. Speaking of crossing paths, I have pictures of when we lived in Biddeford, Maine, and we
This is a
had
good
company come to visit. I think they were NEST pals of my dad. He had gone
They
to
were.
NEST.
They were.
And they had 2 children at the time, and it was Johnny Nicely. But my mother always spelled it Knicely. So when we moved down here and I looked at the roster and saw Johnny Nicely, the pharmacist, I said, well, it's not the same because he spells his name differently. So, but I found out, later, it's the same Johnny. But he and I are sitting in a chair together. I was probably 3 or 4. He might have been 2 or 3. He's about a year younger than me, and we were sitting in a chair. He had on his overalls and his cowboy boots. I had on my cowgirl outfit, the little vest and the little skirt. And I was sitting one direction, he was sitting the other, and I jokingly say, I looked at him and I thought it says, you're either going to be my man or I'm going to whoop you and take your boots. Because I didn't have cowboy boots, so I wanted cowboy boots. But
Did you ever get them?
no. Yes, I was a nursery school teacher, and the family in the church were from Texas, and she gave me a pair of cowgirl boots one Christmas. So yeah,
Good.
I still have them.
It's interesting how you can look back, which we all do when we reach this stage of life, and see how the Lord interweaves all your experiences in a way that while it's happening, you don't really see it. Maybe you see it later. But our second church ended up being, since she was from West Virginia, we thought we should be near her family if we could. So I took a small church in Clear Fork, look it up, West Virginia, with the understanding that because it was a small church, I would need secondary employment, which was when I started driving school bus, actually, and it suited me very well. That was God put us in very loving churches, of which there were only 3. Back to Bridgeton first, then to Clear Fork. We were there for 7.5 years. While we were there, among many others whose paths crossed, were David and Karen Hall. They were in the same conference. They were in the Princeton, West Virginia church, and we knew them again at the time, and then years went by and we lost touch. We were very happy to know that we were going to get reacquainted again, and we were also very fond. We didn't know David's parents, but we knew Karen's parents. That would be Orville and Alma Harvey, wonderful, wonderful people in that conference. And also, while we were there, I was tapped to be the camp director at Camp Pocahontas. Not my forte, but I was the young kid at the time, so I did. And Joe Pritchett, who is our regional superintendent, was one of our campers. So I don't know if we should move forward with that story. But
Let's see if we have time. And you met at Berkshire.
We did.
And when did you get married?
I earned a PhD.
Which is?
I finished 2
explain
years
that one.
and got a
Put hubby through.
Put hubby through.
Through.
I worked his last year at Berkshire, and so we were married in '69, and just celebrated 51 years. Our
Congratulations.
51st.
Brenda completed the 2-year program. She was a year behind me, and then we were married between my junior and senior year. And what was the question again?
I don't know.
So we...
when did you get married?
Yes, it was in 1969, and
In
we were
Charleston,
married
West
in
Virginia.
Charleston. And so, yeah, as she said, we've cleared the 51-year mark. You want to get into children yet?
Not yet, because
yet.
I have a new question I've asked people and gotten some wonderful answers. Was there something memorable about your wedding that you'd want to share?
Yes. Yes.
That's Brenda's story.
It was a very small church. It was the Elmore Church. It was a basement because they tore the church down because they had to move it because of the highway.
Highway was
so
going
it was
through,
in
so
the
in a
basement.
basement.
Hot summer day, and came in. The church. The wedding started. My dad started crying. Got up to the front. Bob was crying. Everybody was crying around me
For the joy.
for the joy.
Were you sure that was why?
We made it to the prayer. As we were kneeling, Bob was, crying. And so I took out my blue tissue, handed it to him. He blew his nose and handed it back. I said, "We're married." I could tell, we're married. Okay, so that was memorable. My mother had broken her foot 2 days before the wedding, stomping on a toy that one of the kids left in the floor. So
It was memorable.
it was memorable.
So then there were children.
Our son
Yes.
Daryl was born late 1970 in
1970.
Bridgeton, Maine, after we took the first church there. And our daughter was born in West Virginia while we were in Clear Fork in 1973. So we have two
You want to
beautiful
elaborate
kids.
a little on Daryl?
Absolutely.
Daryl is a neurologist, actually. He and his wife, Ellen, and our granddaughter, Claire, live in Mount Vernon, New York, which is in Westchester County, just north of the city. Daryl basically commutes back in across the state line into Connecticut, where his main office is in Norwalk, where we were for 35 years. He also has an office in White Plains. Our daughter Liesl has given us 2 children. Sadly, she is divorced. Amanda is in the process of, I guess we'll call it, graduating from high school, because they haven't had the virtual ceremony yet, but that would be Amanda. And her brother Jude is 16. He will now be a junior in high school. And Jude plays ice hockey, and he's been in the band, and I guess he still is in the band, if they have band, right? And our daughter, Liesl, we named her after The Sound of Music, the oldest girl in that film. Liesl is employed with a local organization called STAR. I'm not sure what the STAR stands for, but she works with handicapped adults and does a very fine job, and it seems to suit her very well. So.
When you were talking about being the bus driver, then that continued in your career as well as being a pastor. Is that right?
It did, with a little bit of a gap When we moved to Norwalk, Connecticut, we were in that church again for 35 years. We moved there in 1979. And in the beginning, from a financial point of view, we were fine. When Daryl was ready for college, it was obvious that we would need a little more income. So I thought, and I prayed about it too, of course, maybe revert back to the school bus driving. They're always asking for drivers. And consulted the church board. They were fine with it. And it doesn't tie you up all day, which is the benefit of that particular job. And I've always had a love of driving, and I still do, so it really suited me well. So I drove 7.5 years in West Virginia and 25.5 years in Norwalk out of the 35 years that we were there, if that makes sense. And it meshed very, very nicely. I've got to mention another quick connection with the Norwalk. The Norwalk Church is really quite a historical church from an Advent Christian point of view. That was the home base of the Ainsworth family. And so that includes Ariel's mom and dad, and Ariel and Bernice's daughter, Connie Jones, and then their daughter, Mary Jane Sutter. Connie's grandmother in 1936 in that church, I think this was during the Depression, was instrumental, no pun intended, of getting a pipe organ installed in that church, which is still used to this day, as far as I know. It was an SD Corporation from Brattleboro, Vermont. The total price of that instrument was $1,400. I have a copy of the contract. We were so fortunate to have that grand instrument in that little church, but it was really through the Ainsworths that even occurred. I love the connections and the overlap that is among our little Advent Christian family.
And Brenda, I know during the time that you were in Norwalk, you worked. Tell us about what you did.
Yes.
Well, I took a position in a nursery school that Doc Carter worked in. And I kept saying, it's only temporary, it's only temporary. So I was there 2 years, and the lady retired, and so I was left alone. We wanted to do an outreach program in our church, and we started an after-school program that didn't quite fit. The Y started one, so everybody was going there. But we started a nursery school. We started, it was called Tot Stop, T-O-T-S-T-O-P. And that was there for about 9 or 10 years. And then we were licensed and we had to state licensed and had to, we surrendered our license for other concerns. But we renamed it King's Kids. And I did that for about 15, so about 30 years I had a nursery school in the church. And it was a wonderful outreach. Got a lot of families and touched a lot of lives through that little ministry, and proud of it today.
That's not bad for a temporary job.
That's not too bad for a temporary job. It was really what God wanted me to do. It was definitely the ministry He had planned for me. So I was thrilled, and still am thrilled that I did it. So
we had a very good mix in the Norwalk Church, and Norwalk is kind of a unique place because it is a suburb of New York City. You can be in and out of the city. I mean, you can go to the city on a whim if you wish to do that, and we did get into the city many times, of course. My grandson Jude, before we left, he was old enough to say, "Grandpa, can we ride the train to New York?" And I'd say, "Jude, yeah, we probably can do that in a day or two." So the commuter line from New Haven went right by. We could walk to the train station, and we would hop the next train, and we could get off in Grand Central Terminal in about an hour. You were in the middle of it all, which was kind of a nice feature. We went into the city many times to see churches and museums, and always went in at Christmas time. But we had a good mix in that church. We had fifth generation children before we left. There were
Oh my goodness.
children who were fifth generation in the church. We had a wonderful music program. Karen Cook was our organist and choir director. We had an excellent musical program. Another claim to fame, I guess, for Norwalk would be Pepperidge Farm. If you look on any Pepperidge Farm baked good, you'll see in the small print there, you'll see Norwalk, Connecticut. That is where that stuff comes from. We were impacted by the tragedy of 9/11. Norwalk lost, I think, 20 or so individuals in that horrific event, and it came home to us. We had a widow who, after that tragedy happened, she affiliated briefly with the church, and they had a young daughter, and when enough time had passed, she was concerned. There was no remains found of her husband, and she was concerned about what could be done about that and a proper, remembrance. And it finally came to me with Norwalk has several cemeteries. One is very, very large. It's a beautiful cemetery. And I said to her, Jennifer, I said, would you consider having a bench, a nice bench, granite or whatever, placed in the cemetery in your husband's memory? And she was so happy at that suggestion. And so she got the bench ordered from wherever it came from, and the family assembled, and we had a service for her and in memory of her husband. I had a neighbor that went down to, we were right on Long Island Sound. We could be at the beach in 5 or 6 minutes. And he came back after driving down to the water's edge, and he said, you can see the smoke coming up out of the city, even right there in Norwalk. Kind of a unique place. I couldn't go back to the traffic. The traffic is awful. It's part of the normalcy of living in that area, and you kind of accept it as normal. But I told both of my kids, I said, after living in Dowling Park, I really wouldn't be able to handle traffic like that any longer.
You know what this tells me? We have to have another front porch conversation. There's lots of things about the stories that we don't know. There are lots of stories about the stories to be told.
This has been a great pleasure.
And for me as well. And because we have to talk about your music, and you knew about the village from your family,
Sure.
Your parents living here.
Yep.
So we'll do a PS to this one.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in today, and please tune in again for maybe the follow-up of the story, and for other front porch conversations.